Good morning. Dog park again. Enjoying ourselves. My pups are running about, sniffing and doing all the things that pups are supposed to do. And part of the reason I do the dog park, even though we have enough property for the dogs to run around, is that this is a really good way of helping with zoomies and getting them lots of sensory experiences, because dogs they need sensory experiences. Okay, so sidetrack. Values. Can values be bad? Oh boy, this is a fun one. So let's first start by defining values in a behavior analytic way. So values serve as both long-term reinforcers, and values also can serve as motivating operations. So they can increase or decrease the probability of behavior occurring, and they can also increase or decrease the punishing or reinforcing effects of consequences. That's what a motivating operation is. In behavior analytic terms, this is a term you may not be familiar with. This would be called an augmental. So values serve as augmentals. And what happens is when we identify a value and we move towards that value, or even if we don't necessarily have to identify it per se, but if we're, informing our decisions, our goals, our, actions based off of values, then those can inform our actions, and that's something called committed action. Now, back to the question of are value or can values be bad? The answer is yes, just like anything. Anything can be harmful, negative, poorly, have negative consequences, socially anyways. And, in fact, one of the favorite values that I like to talk about that tends to have some very negative consequences is the value of supremacism. Value set definition, the idea or concept that one group or section or arbitrarily assigned stimulus is supreme over another or others. And some people would argue that supremacism by default is just a toxic value. You should never have it, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, not necessarily. There's a time and a place for it. Like, for example, in games, games are presumed, like the very presumption or value set that informs games, at least at some level, is that, one person or persons can come out supreme in the competition. Now, you can shift those values. You can have multiple values, just like with emotions. You can have more than one value set informing your decision making. So, for example, if you're playing a cooperative game, then the cooperative game's value set is, yes, there's a supremacy component to it, but there's also a collaboration component. That doesn't presume that the value set itself is negative by default. It is. Just like reinforcement is and punishment is, it just happens. So we can't automatically assume that because somebody holds a particular value set that means that is bad. However, there's an additional rub to this. And that additional rub is you can have a value that typically is considered beneficial, or typically has a positive light to it. Let's say creativity. And you can be holding so tightly, figuratively, to creativity that it overshadows or it masks the ability for the individual to flexibly engage. And that's a key right there. Flexible engagement. Now, you may have heard this referred to as psychological flexibility inside of the ACT communities. And I like that term, but what I don't like about that term is that most people don't understand what that means. So I prefer to use the term flexible engagement, because when we're talking about flexible engagement, that literally describes what we're going for. We're going for the individual, ourselves, the person we're supporting, engaging flexibly with their environment, which means that it's shifting. So, for example, I value creativity. I love creativity. It's wonderful. It's something that is very much important to me and informs a lot of my decisions. And I can be so thoroughly fused with the value of creativity. I can be holding so tightly to it that it can get in the way sometimes of me accomplishing other things that are also important to me. Like, for example, I can be so thoroughly stuck on creating something that I forget to, I don't know, make a meal for my family, because something that I also value is family. And yet I can be so stuck with that. So the idea is flexible engagement, functional contextualism. I know that, like, behavior analysts were so used to describing and seeing things in the context of very discrete observable behaviors. And guess what? We can do discrete observable behaviors when it comes to values. And in fact, when it comes to values in the work that we do with our learners, identifying values can increase our effectiveness with our learners. I like to point out that, especially because a lot of folks are like, well, you know, if they're non-speaking, non-vocal, blah, 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 like, it's really hard, or it's really hard to get values out of kids when they're just not wanting to talk to you if they are vocal speaking. And my response to that is, yeah, well, you know, we would like for the kid to just walk up and tell us what the function of their behavior is too, but that's not how it works, right? We're behavior analysts. We identify, based off of the data, the stimulus, the information that we collect and observe in the environment. So we have to be values detectives. And interestingly, when we're values detectives, that helps us to understand a little bit better what the heck is going on. So, just a quick little snippet on being a values detective and how you can do that. Let's start with making sure that we're taking ABC plus data. Now, I call it ABC plus data because MOABC is a little bit hard on the tongue, and difficult to say, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when in the context of ABC, because A, B, C, they come in order, right? That's the relational frame that we like to use to help people to remember. So the plus stands for motivating operations, and the data that we can take on motivating operations can include the emotions that are being expressed. It can include the pieces of information that are setting events that tell us what the heck is going on in the environment. So you can take in, like, a parent walks in and says they had a really rough night. They didn't get very much sleep. Oh, cool. That's great. That's good information, right? That's an MO, right? Or, you know, you're taking your ABC data and you notice that the consistent amount, at a consistent time of day, we start seeing the learner having a harder time. And we discover that, oh, it's because it's been about 4 hours since they ate, because they came home from school and they're just getting caught up in the normal everyday task activity things. And so what's happening is that the stimulus in the environment is masking access to a very vital piece of reinforcement, which is food. Like, it's a bodily necessity. It's a primary reinforcer. So that, like, ABC plus data. Like, there's other ways of saying it. I'm not saying that like this is the only way of doing it, but I'm just saying it's a fun, easy way of labeling what you're experiencing, what you're observing, and what you're doing. And, that allows for you to be able to, start to understand what sort of values the learner might be having. The other thing to add into with this, because this is just the beginning of being a values detective, is you also want to see what they're moving towards and what they're moving away from. And the reason why this matters is because when we identify what the learner is moving towards, that helps us to understand a little bit what matters to them. And when we identify what they're moving away from, we're identifying what they don't like, what they don't want to experience or engage with. This is crucial, and here's why. First off, before we jump into the words, I can do them. Before we jump in further with that, moving away from something is not a value. Values have to pass the dead man test. So if I say I want to stop feeling tired, then guess what? That's not a value, because a dead man can stop feeling tired. But if I say instead, I want to feel well rested, that is a value, right? Or potentially a value. Maybe it's connected to health and a desire for health, or maybe it's connected with a few other potential values. But when we're looking at values and we're looking at learners, especially non-speaking or early learners, we can look at universal values. We can identify what's a potential universal value that everybody has access to. I'll tell you right now, off the top of my head, some universal values include community, connection, fun, rest, relaxation, engagement, curiosity, creativity. Now, when I say universal values, I don't mean that everybody has these values. I mean that these values are more frequently, like foundational values, something that like everybody develops very early on. And we need to take these into account in context with functions of behavior. We're behavior analysts and function matters. And a value can serve as an augmental for the function of the behavior. It can increase or decrease the likelihood of a behavior occurring, or decrease or increase the reinforcement or punishing value of the stimulus, of the consequence. So taking those into account is really essential. And understanding that a value is not good by default. It is. It's our engagement with it that determines. It's how we interact with it that matters. I can be so invested in being inclusive that I can ignore all the signs that somebody is causing harm, is justifying harm, is being well-meaning but hateful or hurtful. And if I hold too tightly to the value of inclusion to the point that I'm including people who are themselves invested in a different value set, or maybe are stuck on avoidance of inconvenient stimulus, or maybe they're fused with that value or a different value, that it can cause harm to me and those that matter to me. Flexible engagement. That's the key. So I hope you enjoyed this little journey at the dog park, and a look at values. And I keep on forgetting to show the dog park because this thing is just gorgeous. Also, I recently launched a Patreon account. And if you could support, I would appreciate it. The patreon.com/bearded behaviorist. We're making certain things and designs that I've created exclusive to Patreon subscribers. Eventually they'll be available for everyone else, but you know, it's one of those things. Advocacy work and the work that I'm doing, it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of energy and resources. And so, for the longest time, I was resistant to doing this. And then until I realized that I could engage in my value of creativity and creating fun and interesting designs and provide added value to you as a consequence of supporting the Patreon. So, if you are able to support, please go to that website, patreon.com/bearded behaviorist. Or you can go on my link tree, or, well, link pop in my bio. Any support helps. All of it helps. If you can't afford to do Patreon, or just there's other things going on, that's perfectly fine. Share with others. That helps too. And if you just want some fun one-off designs, go to legendmasters.com. That's my graphic design company that I co-own with another autistic individual who we've worked together for years and years, and we have a lot of fun with print and design. And in fact, for those company owners out there, we do on-demand prints that allows for you to be able to do customized shirts. So here's a fun one for you. Imagine for less than the cost of buying price per shirt of buying several hundred or 50 plus shirts, where the cost is pretty high. You could do customized shirts where each individual therapist has their name on their shirt, and then your logo on the back or something cool like that. We've done that for companies before. We can do all sorts of cool stuff. So, we're very competitive. And in fact, Legend Masters bread and butter is we actually serve small businesses. It's, the other fun designs that we have posted on Legend Masters under the Punisher brand and the Bearded Behaviorist brand. Those are just for fun. But we love supporting and serving small businesses because, it's hard to do business in this world, and we need resources that help people to be able to be successful. So anyways, thank you for joining me for this lovely journey on values, and I hope you have a lovely day.